Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Plum Talks. I'm your host Natasha Joshi, and for today's episode, we are going to talk about how to craft standout thought leadership content to boost your brand with Paul Campero. Hi Paul, how are you today?
Hey, I'm good. Just went for a long walk. It's really hot out here, so it's nice to go early, so you don't get the the big heat that's coming our way later.
Awesome. So Paul, just in the beginning, could you please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your experience?
Oh, sure. So I guess the most relevant experience is that in 2015, I joined a company called Typeform, and I began as their first official marketer. And they grew. I just remember I was like number 28 in the company, and by the time I left, there was like 400 people in the company. So it was like a big, massive growth spurt. And during that time, started in marketing. I wrote copy for the product, wrote copy for all the marketing assets. Then I got into content. Then I was leading the copy and story team, and then eventually to director of brand there. And after I left Typeform, I joined another startup called Twism, and I was director of brand there, just working on their brand strategy. And then I left there and joined the company where I'm at now. I'm head of marketing at Rep AI, which is Shopify's first AI shopping assistant, or AI shopping concierge is what we like to call it.
Mhm.
And basically it just helps guide people during their shopping experience and provides a concierge-like experience.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. And just so we can start defining the topic, so I would ask you to, if you could place a clear definition of what is exactly thought leadership and why are we talking about it right now, especially for marketers out there who are mostly focused on creating brands like Typeform. So could you explain what is thought leadership and why is it relevant?
Okay, so there's a lot of content that exists in the world, and a lot of it is not good. I should say it's like super mediocre, and I think a lot of people are just copying each other. But I think what people really crave is someone who has a different perspective of the industry, or a different perspective of the product, or different perspective of the category that you're in. And that tends to be the content that really stands out, because people are looking for someone to lead them rather than someone to just give them the standard of what's already out there, right? So um, when I was at Typeform, I used to talk about this a lot. I used to talk about hot dog content. And basically, hot dog content is when you take a little bit of everything, you go to Google, you do a search, you pick up a little piece here, a little piece there, and then you put together an article. And it's like it's basically a remix of everything that's already out there. That might be great for SEO, but that's not going to be great for inspiring people to follow you and to get behind you, right? And so um, thought leadership is important today because positioning is still important. It's always going to be important. And you need to stand out in some way whenever you produce a piece of content. Whether or create a product or create a new feature, you're always looking to stand out and differentiate yourself. And I think that's the lens that I bring to this, is a very brand focused lens on how to do content and how to make it really stand out.
All right. I think if any brand is thinking about long term, like they want to stay in the market for long term, thought leadership content or content that is actually making sense for their audience would be the right option, right? So, moving ahead, could you tell us a little bit about the practical steps any marketer or any individual for their own personal brand as well they can take to create this kind of content? Like when you started your journey, and if you could take any example of a brand, could you define the steps that you would start with?
Oh, okay. So there's a couple questions there. So if I was going to use an example, I think a really good example is MailChimp and what they do with MailChimp Presents. I think there's a way to kind of um, categorize thought leadership as well. And I think this is what I tried to do recently. I just released an article on, how to do thought leadership well, how to create kick-ass thought leadership. But I would say an example is like MailChimp Presents, and what they do very well is narrative. So industry narrative storytelling around entrepreneurship. And, you know, when they do these inspiring stories, people tend to associate those feelings of inspiration with the product. And I think it's very smart about what they're doing. And, you know, really speaking to what you just said a second ago, as far as the long-term aspect of it, I think it's super important to have that perspective because there's a lot of short-termism when it comes to marketing. And, you know, a lot of people are putting a lot of effort into performance. But I think the research bears out that brand over time is actually the thing that is going to provide the most value as far as marketing.
Mhm.
And I can point you to the research if you want to take a look at it. But as far as practical steps, to get to a place like MailChimp Presents. And I had a conversation with their VP of brand, the guy who's behind their MailChimp studio. And he basically said, look, we just want to inspire people. So you start out with a goal. We just want to inspire people and, you know, create something that's worthy of watching and sharing. So that's another aspect of it. And then you know, in a sense, you're also the litmus test, right? You're looking at yourself. You're saying, what do I really enjoy? What do I really like? And what would I like to see? And I don't think people ask that enough. I think the tendency, and it's rightfully so, is to look at what other people are, what they want to see. I had a call today with a customer, and I asked them, you know, what kind of content are you paying attention to? What kind of content do you open on a regular basis? You know, and I think that's really important. You want to be able to get that information. And I would say that's a practical step that people can start doing right now is interviewing their own customers. And I don't think that happens enough. But the other side of that is what's your taste? What do you want to see? Right. And so it's like a combination of here's what I want to see, here's what would amaze me, and then here's what my customer is generally looking for. And you want to bring that together in some way and create something like really engaging, something that's going to last. I would also say something that's going to be evergreen, something that's going to stand the test of time. It's not just going to be, hey, here's the top 10 things to do for SEO in 2023, right? It's much more long-term thinking than that. So to me, those are some practical steps that people can take. And I think MailChimp Presents is a good example. I think people started copying them. I saw Square started doing videos similar to MailChimp Presents, and I thought that was super interesting. And then I saw Shopify started doing that too. So it's a good model that exists. And last time I checked, MailChimp is pretty successful. Last time I talked to them, their ARR was like 700 million a year. So it's pretty good.
That's awesome. And I completely agree, especially when you're talking about content being used long term. Because right now a lot of brands are focused on trends, which is not wrong. But the only con with trends is that it will keep changing with time. And being in marketing, especially if you're going to talk about today and you're creating content about today, which is not really uh, you know relatable to the coming future, or maybe the
Yeah.
content that can be used in the coming future, it might
Yeah.
not be that much helpful, right?
That's a good point. It's mindset too. So you got to have people who are paying attention to trends are not trendsetters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you do want to you do want to pay attention to trends and you want to see what's going on, but the reason why it's called thought leadership is because you're leading something, you're seeing something that nobody else is seeing. And so and I think people need to consider what doesn't exist already versus what already exists, and or maybe take what already exists and ask what else, what's next, what's coming after this. So yeah, that's the whole point. It's like thought leadership is uh, content that leads. It's not something that's acknowledging what's already happening in the industry. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think there's a little bit of risk that needs to be taken there. There's a little bit more thought that has to be given before you create something like that. You have to be able to see things and assimilate a bunch of information, a bunch of different topics, and be able to come out with something and synthesize it into something that makes sense for everybody. But it's also simple, right? It's like it's a clear vision of how things should be. And I don't think a lot of people have strong opinions on how things should be. more or less what you said, acknowledging the existing trend or the existing situation that already exists.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I just have one doubt here. As a listener, I wanted to understand this. If we are talking about thought leadership content, do we have to have, is it related to education about one particular subject? Is it related to the experience that you put into a subject or into a domain, and then you share that content with your audience? Because a lot of people out there, especially we see a lot of content on LinkedIn and personal brands, people do this. They take content from other people, leadership content, and they copy it and paste it there. Maybe they make some changes, but then is it the same? Is it that much effective?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't call that I mean, it's an overused word, and I think it's important to say it's authenticity
Mhm.
and, coming from your own personal experience or your own point of view. It's kind of like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, but you create a piece of content for your CEO, right? But if your CEO doesn't understand everything, then that's not gonna translate well, and it's not gonna go over well. And I know what you're talking about is like someone's taking what someone else is seeing, and then they might add a little nuance here and there, but it's still somebody else's ideas. Um, and right now, I know some really good thought leaders on LinkedIn, like Chris Walker, for example, and he's also acknowledging that a lot of people are stealing his content and then repurposing it. Um, but again, that's not we wouldn't call that thought leadership. That's maybe content theft, if anything. Um, but back to what you're saying. I think it's necessary for people to start with a framework, right? And I think the framework that I always go back to is the experience level framework. And to me, there's four types of experiences. And especially when you're thinking about your business, you should probably consider these four different types. The first one is ordinary experience. It's like what we typically experience on a day-to-day basis. It could be having a conversation or going for a walk or whatever, but there's really nothing memorable about an ordinary experience, right? And then you want to go from ordinary to memorable. So memorable is where you have some type of emotion was that occurs, right? So if you create a piece of content or you create an ad or a campaign, it needs to generate emotion. Okay. And I can point you to some research as well that Les Binet and Peter Field did a lot of research in the effectiveness of ads. And what they found was emotion trumps rationality all the time, right? And even more emotion is better than more rationality in the end. So, but they also found the same over time, long term, like brand outperforms performance over time. But most people don't invest in brand or they don't understand it, so they stay away from it. But memorable experience needs to evoke an emotion, right? And that's kind of what Peter Fields and Les Binet are getting at. And then once you go from memorable, you can go to meaningful, right? And so this is where you generate an insight. So you just don't have an emotion. Your content is able to give somebody an insight into something. And the best thought leaders always deliver insights because they're coming from their own experience. They're sharing their own experiences, right? And then if you can get to the insight stage, then maybe you can make it to the next stage, which is the hardest stage, right? Which is transformation, where you create a change. Not just that you have an insight, but I take that insight and I apply it to my life and make some type of change in my life. And so to me, that this is the framework that I always use. Like if I'm creating a piece of content, my goal is to get to transformation, right? And you don't always get there. It's very difficult. But at the very least, I'm going to try and generate some emotion, right? And in the middle, the sweet spot in the middle, you want to have some insight. You want to deliver some insight. Your thought leadership should, at the very minimum, deliver some type of new insight that somebody didn't have before. And I think that's like a critical part of this whole process.
Mhm. I get that completely, and I completely agree with the point where you mentioned about emotion. Because I have read some blogs, and when we are reading some content, we understand that if they are adding the emotion, the person who is reading this understand that there's another human being sitting there, sharing their own views, sharing their own perspective. I have another question related to this. So when we are talking about sharing such thought leadership content, and in terms of personal brand, it's a different criteria. Like if we are talking about building my own personal brand, then I can share my experience and guide people like this is the way like you can build your own brand or any other thing. But when it comes to brand, do you think brand should also focus it towards a person? Like if I am representing Plum Fine, let's say. So if I would be representing the entire brand and then I'm sharing such content, that would be more impactful, or brand itself sharing such content. Like if we are focused on marketing and we are creating content around marketing, giving some insight to our audience, would that be more impactful? What do you think?
Okay. Well, based on what I know and what I've seen, and there's actually a book about this. It's called The World's Greatest Brand. And it's all about how you get your staff, your employees, your individual contributors to post on your behalf, right? So I've talked to a few CMOs about this. I talked to some thought leaders in the space. They all agree that it's better for you, the person, to share your thoughts and insights than it is for it to come from the brand. The brand is it's not human, right? So it's hard for people to associate the brand has these types of thoughts and this type of perspective. I think where the brand comes to play is that it shares, like the brand channels share what people have said or what people have thought. Hey, our CEO said this, or head of marketing said this, or this person said this, right? I think that's super important and as a distribution channel. But as far as where the source should come from, it should come from people, and because that's like, and it's probably going to get more shares and it's going to get more engagement than it does when it comes from a brand.
Mm. I agree completely. And I think there are some exceptions to this as well. Like majority, in the majority scenario, of course, this is the thing that people want to connect with people. But there's this brand called Zomato, and it's very popular, and its marketing schemes are very popular because every day it's sharing emails, and some people are actually they are actually enjoy the emails that the brand shares because it's very entertaining. That's why this is one of the reasons. So I think this way a brand could be an exception, right? Coming back to your
Yeah,
strategy. Yeah, please. What are you saying?
no, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think that's a different type of content than thought leadership, though, right? It's
Yeah,
just,
yeah. I
yeah.
was
So
just sharing
that's,
the insights. So
yeah.
coming back again to the thought leadership content and your framework as well, are there any resources that you use on daily basis? Are there any website that you go
Website for
to use?
resources.
Yeah, for resources or website that you use while creating such content.
No, just an empty document. And maybe, I mean, in the past, it was you read a lot, you
Mhm.
take in what's happening, you look at things that are happening in the world, you try to make connections that nobody else can see. Um, you also, what I did, my first thought leadership piece for Typeform got over 1,500 shares, for example. And that's shares, it's not like likes or whatever. But when you saw who was sharing it, it was like Sean Ellis and, like some top influencers in the space, right? Adaptive Path, a lot of different people. Um, but really, it was based off the CEO's vision and how he saw things, and I was just able to translate it. So he became my resource in a sense, right? And I think this is what you're looking for. You're looking for something that is special about the way you see the world, your unique perspective, right? And we were talking earlier about this matrix that I kind of created because I'm like, oh, I have to create more thought leadership, and how would I do that? Well, I created a matrix, and one of the main things that it's my own resource, but one of the main things it does is tries to understand which perspective you're coming from. Is it a personal perspective? Is it from the product's perspective? Is it from the organization, or is it from the industry or the category, right? And so you want to make sure you understand what that perspective is before you like dive into something, because you don't want to jump into something that you don't really know, right? Like if you say, hey, I want to write a thought leadership piece about the category or around the industry, but I don't know anything about the industry or the category, then that's not going to come across very well, right? But if I have a lot of personal experience, or if I have a lot of product experience, or I feel like the product is special in this way, then there's potential there, right? Like I can craft something from that based on, hey, maybe I go interview a bunch of customers and I get their perspective and how they see certain things. I talk to the founder or the creator of the product, and he has or she has a perspective on things. And what I do is I try to take all this research and take it into a document, and then try to figure out, hey, what's different here? What's special here? What here is being said that nobody else is saying? And I try to look for angles. I think that's like the most important thing. It's like you want to make sure you find these angles that nobody else is seeing. You might want to take a contrarian view. What's the contrarian view here that I need to take that everyone else is zigging while I'm zagging? Okay, like let's make sure that I find what those things are. And I think, again, I'm going to use that word authentic. Like it needs to come from an authentic place. Otherwise, it's not going to go over very well, right? In the end, people can smell whether something is like an original piece, or they can smell whether it's something that you just kind of hash together from everything else that's already out there.
Mhm. I think, especially in case of repurposing a piece of content, if we actually don't have such knowledge about it, the part which you mentioned, that looking at the same piece with different angle could really work. Like if we are looking at certain point and we put our angle into it, like this is the view, this is my view, my perspective, and then share that content, it might give, uh, you know, it a different angle, and a certain number of audience might actually connect with it, because people don't usually agree on everything. So another type of audience, or maybe some other people, could actually connect with such content. I want us to focus again on the brand side of thought leadership content. So can we take an example of a brand, and could you guide our listeners towards how a brand, let's say there's a SaaS brand, and it want to create the brand wants to create thought leadership content, maybe through one of the employees, maybe for community in general. So where do you think a brand must start with? Like, shall the brand start by talking about the subject that they're focusing on, or some kind of experience, or what they are going to do in future, like telling the audience this is the problem and this is how we solve them. But it would be very salesy. So what is your opinion?
Okay, well, most people think they have a brand, but maybe they don't, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's an important distinction there. Like, what is a brand? We should probably define that, right? Um, but a brand is really something that someone else says about you, like the impression that they have about you, right? And so it's very difficult for you to have a brand strategy if you don't know what that is. Like if you don't know what you are, what's special about you, and what other people think is special about you. And so I think this is where you need to start. Like everyone needs to start there. So if I had a SaaS product and like I just brought in, I was just brought into this company in February. First thing I'm asking is what's different? What's unique here? What's special here? What are we creating? What's your vision for the future of this product? And I have to admit, like when I first came in, I wasn't very impressed with the product. I was questioning a lot of things. But the more I got into it, the more I talked to them, the more I realized that there is something special here. And you have to dig, right? You have to be almost like an agnostic journalist in a sense, and ask these questions and get to the point of, hey, what is special about this thing? So once you find out what's special about it, maybe you discover like why the product exists, like the brand purpose, right? And you also discover the market category that it exists in. And I think there's also like a lot of potential there when you get into category and things like this. But generally speaking, most people aren't creating new categories. They're probably creating subcategories, right? And so if you're in a subcategory, then you have to use that to your advantage and you have to talk about that. So So that's why I bring up those like 4 different perspectives, is because the industry or category is one perspective. What's your perspective on your product's industry or category, right? So that's one thing. What kind of reports or data-driven insights, or what vision do you have for it? Like, what do you envision for the future of this category? And you should have an opinion on that. You know, someone should have an opinion on that, right? Unless they're just like, hey, well, I was just in the garage and I was just building something, and I wasn't thinking about all this in a very strategic way. But that's what's good about people like marketers, right? They come in and they try to find something special about it, and you have to find something special. So I would say that's the first thing. The first order of business is to figure out what's special about this and really dive into that. When I talk about brand, I always talk about the word differentiation, right? Differentiation is like a super important word, but to really understand what differentiation is, you have to understand 2 words. So differentiation is made up of 2 words: different. So it has to be different. How is it different? And then difference is the other word. What difference is it making? So it's like different is one thing. What's special about this, at least on the surface level, at least maybe on the philosophical level or whatever it is. And then what difference is it making in the world? When you talk to customers, when you figure out what those things are, or when you talk to your market, when you create a piece of thought leadership content, or any piece of content, really, what's unique or special about this, and what difference is it really making in people's lives, right? And so to me, that's like the essence of what a brand is, at least when you come from a brand strategy point of view. When you figure out what a brand is really what people think about you, right? What feelings and thoughts they associate with your company. And so is there a match there? Like, hey, we think this is special about us, and then over here, they're saying something else, right? They're saying it's something completely different. And so you have to figure out a way to traverse those 2 points. And so it's like this Venn diagram, right? They just need to work together.
Absolutely. I'm still thinking about the difference and difference that you mentioned, because a lot of companies, let's not say brand, a lot of companies actually miss out that point, being different and making the difference. A lot of people, marketers may miss out on that thing. So it is great that you mentioned it right now. Moving
Well,
ahead, do you think?
if people are struggling with this when they use the word best. If they use the word best, they don't know what's different about them, because different
Can
is better than best.
can you elaborate it a little, like with some examples?
Yeah, the point is, when you say I'm trying to be better than somebody else, or I'm the best, or I'm number one, you're basically comparing yourself to somebody else, right? But if you're different, there's no comparison. So that's really what you're looking for. For example, when I was at Typeform, we were completely different. There's no other form builder that was out there. There's a lot of copycats after we developed our interface and put it out there, but nobody was doing one question at a time. Nobody was seeing the world in the way that we saw the world. And it was different, right? It was clearly different. But when you see what everyone else is doing, they have basically copied what everyone else is doing, and then they try to use language that makes it try to sound unique. But then they use words like "we're the best," and it's like, whenever you use those words, I know you're not different.
Yeah. So people might say that they are best in the market, but it just represent that there are already some companies doing the same thing. And if we are saying different, then this could be the perspective by the audience, that if they are saying that they are different, then they're already putting in, this is used as a UEP, wherein they're already putting in themselves as a different and making a difference in the lives of the audience.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great, great. So since we are talking about brands and how, yeah, Shiv.
Sorry to interrupt, just having a question, maybe that might help in the podcast, but I'm not sure. So, Paul, a great example, just learning from your experience, and just wanted to add or maybe ask a question from my end. Like, for example, when you talk about a brand, when you started working for Typeform, for example, what are the ways or how you started interacting with your technical team, how you understood what their vision is? For example, maybe your CEO, maybe your boss who was taking care of the Typeform that time might be a technical person, for example. So how you understand or absorb the concept or idea that they had, and how you created strategy or whatever the vision in your mind, and then move ahead that type form.
Yeah, I think that was the most important thing. And I was fortunate because I actually sat with David and Robert and had multiple conversations with them. And I would say eventually we even became friends. And, you know, I guess it's more on us and the questions that we ask, because when I first joined, I told them, I said, I'm just going to be an anthropologist. You know, my job is just to observe what's happening and figure out what's going on. And then I'm going to ask the most non-technical questions in the world. And you're going to give me and you're going to give me the answers that come to mind. So, and I'm going to translate it for the audience. I'm going to make sure that I bring this understanding to them. So it really becomes, and I would say like my superpower is talking to people, and I would say listening to people and really trying to understand, because you can ask these questions. And I noticed this too. I've been in a lot of interviews with customers and founders and, all these different types of people, but you can ask these questions, but you're not listening, because you have an agenda. And so I think it's really important that we open our minds a little bit and just really remain curious. And, well, why did you design it this way? And, where did this come from? And why is that over there? And, just asking like very basic questions. Well, what did you originally envision? And, things like this. And you might get nothing back, or you might get a little bit back, but I think it's important for us to kind of drill down a little bit more, right? Well, why are you building the company this way? Why do you want to follow this like non-hierarchical type of like flat organization model, right? Or why are you doing this? Or why do you see the world this way? Like to me, it's just asking really obvious questions and, and just waiting for people to give you answers, and then following up those answers with like deeper, more detailed questions like, well, why did you say that? Why did you? So what is it that you like about Marketing Brew, right? I'm talking to a customer this morning, it's the same thing. So, you ask like really, it might seem like dumb or very obvious questions, but trust me, like nobody knows the answers.
I can totally understand your point here, because while we are working with the technical team, they are much more curious to build the tools, but they never see the marketing perspective. But as a marketing people, we also cannot see the technical perspective while they are building the thing. So the combination of both the minds should be together, then might be a good direction for a product. But I understood your point. Maybe we can talk about it later. Natasha ji, please continue, and I'll mute again.
Sure. What I liked the best about the experience that you shared is you simplified the role of a marketer in just one line, that understanding the technical part and explaining it in simple words to the audience. It makes it very simple for the audience to understand, because of course there are different people and they do not really connect directly with the technical part, and they cannot actually understand why they must use the product.
Yeah. So I probably have an advantage here as well, because prior to working in SaaS, or I would say the tech world, I was a social worker. Yeah. And my job was I started working with youth, and I was working with young people who were coming out of jails, juvenile prison. But my job was to help explain things to them, right? And I had to explain complex concepts, right? And I would say that by doing that, and then eventually working with adults, and then I was working with adults in workforce development. My job is to help them find jobs, right? And so I have to explain so many different things. I have to explain kind of how the world works, how the hiring world works, right? And, it's not a world that they're used to. So when you have to explain things in a very simple way, and then you're paying attention because you're doing it with a live audience, you're paying attention to how they're responding, and you can see whether they get something or not, right? So I think this is the disconnect. It's like we come up with explanations or product explainers or whatever the case is, but we never get to see our audience interact with it, right? Mm-hmm. We never watch like their live reaction, and you're never there to ask, like, did you understand what I said? And if we don't do that, then we really don't Like we don't know what's working and what's not. We're just guessing most of the time. So this is why it's like the most important thing. And if anyone's listening to this podcast, they're going to realize that the most important thing is to talk to your customers, right? Is to get in front of them and to ask them questions, and I think I just remember I gave a talk I was in Barcelona and I gave a talk around jobs to be done or whatever. And a founder came up to me and he's like, yeah, I'm just scared to talk to customers because I don't want them to blow up my baby. Right. And I said, well, then your baby's not going to survive in this world. You have to talk to customers. You're really not going to grow. You're not going to experience hyper growth unless you talk to and engage with customers. So, and and it could be your founder, it could be other people on your team, it could be whatever. It's like you got to talk to people and figure out like what they're thinking when they built that, or what they're thinking when they designed that, what they're thinking when they interacted with something that you created. Right? You have to find these things out.
I actually read this somewhere that Steve Jobs used to do this, that he used to hide some place in around Apple stores and just to see people's reaction, how they're using the phones. And it was actually he mentioned it somewhere that it was actually one of the most useful insight that he could get to work on another products as well.
And
So
you
yeah,
remember his talks. They were so simple.
yeah.
Everything he talked about was so simple. It was just everyone understood it. And to me, this is the power. If you can get to that place of simplicity, even a thought leadership piece doesn't have to be complex, right? The idea should be simple, absorbable, like you should be able to get it. And like I said, your job is to get somebody to feel some type of emotion. And then if you can get them to feel an emotion, can you take them to the next level to get some kind of insight? And if you can get them to feel some kind of insight, maybe you can take them to that final level of change, right? Where they actually change their behavior.
And take the action required.
Take the action.
Yeah. Makes complete sense. I'm already inspired to create my own content. So one very important question that I wanted to ask, and is that we have already discussed about how to create such content and what are the steps that you can take. What is the motive that we can keep in mind? But how do we know that people are actually enjoying the content and they can actually relate with it? Can you mention any KPIs except for if we are talking about social media and they're sharing any content on LinkedIn, for example? We might get some likes, we might get some shares, but is there any other KPI or any other, measurable scale that you have seen in your experience that people took some steps? Are there any other examples other than this?
Yeah, to me, it always comes down to branded keywords, like when people are actually searching for your company. I think that's like a really good sign. Or if they're searching for the topic that you're talking about, right? I'll give you an example. So when I first came into Typeform, I wrote a piece called In Search of the Ultimate User Experience, right? It was based on Typeform's philosophy at the time. And I coined a concept called HX, not UX, but HX. And it was called human experience. And basically what I was trying to explain to people was our founder's philosophy of you should build for the human, not just for the user, right? And so if you're thinking about the human, then you're thinking of it from, I don't know, like a social benefit to an emotional benefit and the functional benefit, but you're also thinking about the context in which they're using your product or whatever the case. So with that one, when we launched that one, I wasn't quite sure what to expect or look for, since I'm like fresh out of social work and into the tech world, and I'm like, okay, so how do we measure success around here, right? And what we found was when people started sharing it, and it had its like own a viral moment, right? And it was like the top 5 of like UX curated newsletters. It was always like getting featured and getting shared, right? And so to me, there's a hierarchy of engagement metrics that you can look at, right? You can look at likes, you can look at comments, but for me, shares was the golden, it It was the thing that you wanted most out of anything, right? Because that's free advertising in the end, right? And I didn't care if it was non-attributable, if people were sharing it in Slack or whatever the case, or if it got shared on social media. For me, that was more of an indicator than anything else. Or a piece of content gets, for example, I wrote one on the future of conversational interfaces, and I know it got like 18,000 unique views. And so to me, that's also an indicator. Is like when people are talking about it, they're sending people to it. And so it's like these types of things, when you see that, you're just like, okay, this is a good thing. We're getting maximum value out of it. Beyond that, it's like beyond those metrics, you just want to see more engagement with other pieces of content, because once people engage with one, then it's like, okay, can we like somehow like increase the traffic to everything else that's here, right? And I've heard this anecdotally from other people, right? Like the CEO or the founder of WeTransfer like loves our blog, right? Or somebody else loves our blog, and they're like influencers, right? And so it's like you want to make sure that you maintain that status over time, right? You want to continue to create things that are very unique, very interactive, because to me, that is the ultimate metric. The ultimate metric is when, for example, this is like 2017, and I'm at a conference and someone comes up to me and they're just like, "You work at Typeform? I want to give you a hug." Like, to me, there's no other metric that beats that.
Makes complete sense, because it's just that feeling that people can connect with you so much and they're ready to give you hugs. Great, awesome. And I really love the concept that you just mentioned about human experience instead of user experience. And just replacing the word human with user makes a difference in how we are going to think about the product, because now we are not just focused on uh, thinking of a persona, like this is the user persona that we are following. Now we are actually imagining a person buying the product, that person using the product, and now we are more focused on helping them solve their problem, right? That makes complete sense.
Yeah, to me, your content needs to make somebody badass at something. So it's like, if you're not making somebody badass, then you need to rethink your content strategy for sure. But yeah, for sure.
I think we are going to keep this the tagline, like how to make somebody badass with your content. All right. So I just have a final question here, and it's the most important question. How do we actually promote the content that we have made? Because in a lot of cases, you might have seen some YouTube videos as well that have exceptional content, but because of low promotion rate, it doesn't actually cover the market that it should. So how do we promote such content? What are the key factors that we should keep in mind while promoting it?
Okay, so a lot of the secret is really in your own list and the list that you're able to build, because that is the list that you want to promote the content to. So if you, for example, if you have a lot of people who are engaged with your product, then your number one goal is to make sure that you promote the content to that list. Okay, because they're the ones who understand the context, they understand the perspective, and they're the ones who are most likely to share because they're already fans of what you're doing, right? So it's more than just creating a piece of content and putting paid behind it. And this is an underrated strategy as well. It's like you got to create something that's worthy of talking about, right? And to me, this is the hardest part. Is you might have created something that looks nice. Okay, you might have created something that, yeah, everyone's like, oh, that's really cool. But that is not the thing that is getting people excited for whatever reason, right? Like when your audience touches it, it's not enough to make them go, wow, I need to talk about this, or I need to share it. So it goes back to kind of what I said before. It's like you have to create something that's worthy of sharing. And a lot of times you're not going to know what that is until you produce it. And so if you don't have that very core engine built in to your content, then it could get out there and And you're going to be wondering, hey, but we poured so much resources in it, or we made it interactive and we did this and we did that, but it doesn't have any traction. Well, there's something off about that piece of content that is not resonating with your audience. And that's okay. Sometimes you're going to build, things that are not going to, or you're going to create or write things that are not going to, get any kind of traction. The example I like to give is Gary Halbert. He's a famous copywriter in the 80s and 90s, and I would say 70s, 80s, and 90s. And he talked about this sales letter that he wrote, right? He was at a bar and he wanted to show his friend, hey, can you read this real quick? And his friend read the sales letter and he looked at it and he says, oh, this is really cool, Gary. Nice job. And Gary heard that feedback and he said, oh no, I have to change this. And so he goes back home, he rewrites everything, and he shows up again at the bar. The guy reads the letter and he looks up at Gary and he says, how do I get this? Right? Yeah. It's two very different reactions. And again, it comes down to the quality of your sales pitch, the quality of your content, the quality of your video, the quality of all these different things, right? You know what Webflow is really good at? They're really good at injecting humor into their tutorials, right? Everyone always talks about you're almost paying attention, you're almost watching, because we use Webflow, but I never knew what people were talking about. Anyway, I'm watching it, and there's always like a little joke in there, like if you pay attention, right? Like, and it's just a 2-minute video on, I don't know, uploading your blog post or whatever, right? And they find some way to get a joke in there, or something that's like sly, right? And you're almost paying attention for that. And so it's like, what is your thing? Again, we go back to differentiation. How is it different? And how is it making a difference? And sometimes you could just make a difference with humor, right? And so if you're trying to get your content out there, it might sound like a broken record, but if you're trying to get something out there, then you have to create something that evokes some kind of emotion or leads to some kind of insight or makes someone want to change, right? And to me, this is like the standard of experience. Like the experience spectrum is like you're mostly going to have ordinary stuff. Every day is ordinary and nothing memorable. And then one thing throughout that day is going to get you like super emotional, right? Maybe it's a TV show, or maybe it's, something you read or whatever the case. And then maybe you might get some insight from it. Like, oh man, I should really start cooking more, or I should start doing something else more, or I never thought of the world in this way before. And then something very rare is going to get you to want to change. And that's our goal, right? This is what we're trying to do. And if your content is not on that spectrum, it's not getting people to close to that place, then they're just not going to share it. They're not going to talk about it. And, it's not so much about getting paid you want to get the right audience. You want to do the basics that everyone knows. If you can boost a post that's already getting traction, that's likely going to be much more successful than trying to boost something that is not been validated and no one really cares about, right?
Right. I think in a lot of cases, as you already mentioned, that evoking an emotion is very important with every piece of content. I think there are some cases where people forget to put emotion into it because they're mostly focused on facts, putting facts like this is what is
Rationality.
happening. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And there's one more example that similar to the ones that you share. I follow this newsletter called Marketing Mind. And what they do is, because their target audience is marketers itself, so they share the experiences, funny experiences, sarcastic experience of marketers. And it makes it, now that I'm thinking about it, the things that you mentioned, now I can relate with it because people actually enjoy sharing it because they're like, okay, if I'm a marketer, you are a marketer. I'll share it to you and I'll say, see, how relatable. This is just like our situation. So that makes complete sense. And these were the questions from my side. Thank you so much, Paul. I got a lot of insight. Like I was making notes continuously so that I can revise these things. Everything that you mentioned, the 4 frameworks and human experience, the kind of examples that you shared, and how do we start actually putting, human or the customer above everything and try to make change in their life. That is the one thing that I'll take from this podcast for sure. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners?
No, I totally agree with you. Like if I was gonna give one takeaway, it's what difference are you making in the world? And can you highlight that even more? And the best way to highlight that is through others. So if you can get other people to talk on your behalf, or maybe to maybe they're not even prodded by you, maybe they're doing it on their own volition and they're just sharing and talking about you. This is the ideal scenario. So the question is, how do I create a talk trigger, or how do I get someone to talk more about what I'm doing? Because no channel ever is going to beat word of mouth, ever. And so that should be the goal of every piece of content. That should be the goal of your product. That should be the goal of every feature that you build. Like everything that comes together is like, how do I get people to talk about this?
I think word of mouth marketing is the oldest and it will always remain. Like word of mouth marketing will always remain the most relevant form of marketing.
Number one.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that's all from my side. Thank you so much once again for being here, taking time to be the part of this podcast. I hope we can connect again very soon with another topic because I really enjoyed this podcast and I'm sure our listeners will do the same. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And with that, we reach the conclusion of this podcast. If you have enjoyed our discussion today, we invite you to explore more insightful episodes on our website or YouTube channel. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to show your support. We also have a very special treat for marketers seeking to enhance their skills in PPC marketing. Visit our website and explore our free academy section, exclusively designed to provide valuable resources and knowledge in this field. And to connect with marketers like yourself, join our Slack community for marketers. Details given in caption below. Thank you.